僕のおばさんは若い頃教師でした。
My aunt was a teacher when she was young.
My aunt was a teacher when she was young. 40.
あの言語を学ぶのは簡単ではありません。
Learning the language is not too easy.
Learning that language isn't easy.
この列車は何時に東京に着くのだろ
う。I wonder what time the train will get to Tokyo.
I wonder what time this train will get to Tokyo.
その子供たちがとてもうるさかったので、私は新聞を読むことができなかった。
The children was so noisy that I couldn't read the newspaper.
The children were so noisy that I couldn't read the newspaper.
彼はその結果を聞いて驚いた。
She was so surprised that
he was surprised to hear the result.
ベンチで新聞を読んでいる紳士はブラウン氏ですか？
The gentleman who is reading the newspaper on the bench, Mr. Brown.
Is the gentleman who is reading the newspaper on the bench, Mr. Brown?
もう9時だ。
It's already 9 o'clock.
It's already 9 o'clock.
子供の時、私はその雑誌を毎週買った。
When I was young, I bought the magazine every week.
When I was a child, I bought the magazine every week.
エミリーはその男性が銀行に入るのを見た。
Emily saw the man go into the bank.
Emily saw the man go into the bank.
あの車は彼のに違いない。
That car
must be his.
トムとジョンは昨日10時前に寝た。
Tom and John went to bed before 10 o'clock.
Tom and John went to bed before 10 o'clock yesterday. 41.
その本は高価だったけれど、その少年は
9. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch.
Okay, here's a silly story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it, jumped into the truck, and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered
Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch. Okay, here's a serious story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen on a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back room and he ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. Jumped into the truck and jumped into the truck and drove home. Jumped into the truck and drove home.
Downtown, he heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it.
He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it.
9. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch.
Okay, here's a silly story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it, jumped into the truck, and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thief.
Then he called the police. Jack, tell me a funny story. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm bored with an TV. Okay, here's a serious story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He had some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran at the back door and saw a truck with Kennedy, jumped into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered the truck belonged to Marvin Horton.
Thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton
Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police.
Truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Then he called the police to report that.
Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report. Then he called the police to report in the. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered the truck belonged to Marvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in the paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch. Okay, here's a serious story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of the restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with key in it. Jumped into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered the truck belonged to Marvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police discovered some cash with that missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of restaurant printed on it. Holden had put the money in a paper bag. With the name of restaurant printed on it. Then he called the police to report thieves in the restaurant. Then he called the police.
The back door and saw a truck with keys in it, jumped into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it.
Here's another one. One evening, a
Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch. Okay, here's a serious story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He had some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran at the back door and saw a truck with keys in it. Jumped into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged. Then he called the police to the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck.
A thief tried to rob a small.
That the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. And it jumped. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged.
Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When When they searched Melbourne, when they, then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Marvin Horton, a man with a long history of crime in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in the paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch. Okay, here's a serious story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with his kid in it. Jumped into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crime in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it.
9.
Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch.
Okay, here's a silly story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it, jumped into the truck, and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it.
Here's another one.
Printed on it. Then he called the police. To report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of the crimes area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money. Horton had put the money in the paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it. Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all of the money, or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was fond of guns and recognized. The shopkeeper was fond of guns and recognized. The shopkeeper was fond of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper. The thief threatened with the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all of the money, or I'll shoot you. The shopkeeper was fond of the guns, and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. To leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." You are too stupid to be a good thief. The shopkeeper was fond of guns and recognized the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief."
Nine.
Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch.
Okay, here's a silly story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of a restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw a truck with keys in it, jumped into the truck, and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it.
Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." I can tell a story too. A 5-year-old somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying,
"Paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it."
Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief.
"Paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it."
Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the
paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it.
Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." I can tell a story too. A 5-year-old boy broke his leg by jumping off the roof of his house today. His parents called an ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. When they asked why he did it, the boy said, "Superman can fly. I thought I could too."
Here is another story. Here is another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money, or I'll shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of the guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored. Jack, tell me a funny story. I'm so bored without any TV to watch. Okay, here's a silly story I heard recently. A local man was working late in the kitchen of the restaurant downtown. He heard some people break into the restaurant and became frightened. He ran out the back door and saw the truck with the keys in it. Jump into the truck and drove home. Then he called the police to report the thieves in the restaurant. Police discovered that the truck belonged to Melvin Horton, a man with a long history of crimes in the area. When they searched Horton's home, police found some cash that was missing from the restaurant. Horton had put the money in a paper bag with the name of the restaurant printed on it. Here's another one. One evening, a thief tried to rob a small supermarket somewhere. The thief threatened the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money, or I'll shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of the guns. The shopkeeper was a fan of the guns. The shopkeeper was a fan of guns.
His doctor said he would. Parents called an ambulance and rushed him to the hospital and told him to leave the shopkeeper with a gun, saying, "Give me all the money or I will shoot you." The shopkeeper was a fan of guns.
The shopkeeper was a fan of guns. The shopkeeper was a fan of guns and recognized that the thief's gun was a toy. He laughed at the thief and told him to leave the shop. He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief." He said, "You are too stupid to be a good thief. You are too stupid to be a good thief." I can tell a story too. A 5-year-old boy broke his leg by jumping off the roof of his house today.